In August 2025, the Ford Carrier Strike Group was doing exactly what American sailors have done in the North Atlantic for more than 4 decades, keeping sea lanes open, keeping global trade moving, and yes, making sure your IKEA furniture still somehow arrives on time despite being shipped halfway around the planet. It was routine, predictable, almost boring. Right up until it wasn't. High above the gray Atlantic, a circling patrol aircraft caught something that did not belong. A signal that didn't fit the pattern. A shadow where there should have been empty water. Within minutes, routine turned into tension, and the calm Atlantic became the stage for the most intense submarine hunt seen since the Cold War ended. What the American crews did not know yet was that at that exact moment, fresh orders had just rolled out of Russia's Northern Fleet headquarters. Close with the Americans. Listen to everything. Collect acoustic signatures, radar emissions, formation, behavior. Moscow clearly believed this was still the old Atlantic, the one where you could sneak close, take notes, and quietly slip away. That assumption aged badly very fast, because challenging the U.S. Navy in its own backyard is about as smart as telling your wife she has gained 10 pounds and then acting surprised when the room goes silent. The technology has changed, the rules have changed, and the margin for error has vanished. If you want to understand how this encounter unfolded and why the balance of undersea power just tilted again, make sure you like the video, subscribe to Titan Navy, and stay with us. This story only gets sharper from here. Inside the Ford's Combat Information Center, the tactical action officer watched the submarine vectors with calm professionalism. Not because the situation was harmless, but because calm comes naturally when you are surrounded by 4 Arleigh Burke-class destroyers carrying enough ordnance to turn any hostile submarine into a permanent reef. At the Russians' current speed, they would reach torpedo range in exactly 47 minutes. From the Russian perspective, the math looked tempting. Once launched, their torpedoes would cover the remaining distance in under 6 minutes. What that math ignored was the other side of the equation. The Ford's escorts carried ASROC anti-submarine rockets that could reach the same submarines in about 90 seconds. At 15:03 p.m., the Admiral asked the question that matters most in moments like this: what is their probable intent? The answer was not subtle. At their current speed and heading, the Russian submarines would be inside intelligence collection range in roughly 40 minutes. The recommendation was to go to general quarters. The Admiral's response, however, was pure American confidence. Let's see how badly they want to embarrass themselves first. That is assuming they could even maintain their approach without being noticed. Within seconds, Link 16 pushed the submarine tracks across every NATO asset in the region. What followed looked less like escalation and more like a SWAT team responding to someone trying to rob a lemonade stand. A British Type 23 frigate, conducting exercises 50 miles to the north, turned south at flank speed. 8 P-8 Poseidon maritime patrol aircraft scrambled from bases in Scotland, Norway, and Iceland. Each P-8 is a $130 million submarine hunter, designed to hear things no submarine wants anyone to hear. Meanwhile, a Virginia-class submarine that had been shadowing the Russians since they left port 3 days earlier finally received permission to make her presence felt. By 15:15 p.m., the tactical picture shifted from tense to borderline absurd. The Russians attempted what they believed was a clever deception. One submarine ascended to about 200 meters and deliberately made noise, while the other 2 went deep, hoping to slip through quietly. Classic Wolfpack thinking, straight out of 1943. The only problem was that this was 2025. NATO acoustic processors had no trouble separating a loud decoy from 2 supposedly quiet submarines that, acoustically speaking, sounded like a broken shopping cart wheel rolling across tile. This was not random aggression. It was a coordinated intelligence operation that would have been impressive in 1985. The Russians wanted the Ford's acoustic signature. They wanted to map escort spacing. They wanted to catalog radar and electronic emissions. All of that data matters if you think you might one day fight the US Navy. What they did not understand was how fast the response would come once the picture was clear. Ships and aircraft converged on their position with overwhelming speed like a swarm descending all at once. By 20:00 p.m., the first P-8 Poseidon arrived overhead, and the 3 Russian submarines were about to learn what hammering really means in NATO vocabulary. The P-8 Poseidon is essentially a Boeing 737 that stopped flying tourists to Florida and decided to make submarines miserable for a living. At roughly $130 million per aircraft, it is the most sophisticated submarine hunter ever put in the air. The joke inside the Navy is that it can hear a dolphin arguing with its spouse at 500 meters depth. Once on station, the P-8 got straight to work, deploying sonobuoys in what's called a boxing pattern. These are directional command-activated acoustic sensors, underwater microphones designed to provoke submarines into revealing themselves. Each one costs more than many Russian sailors earn in a year, and NATO was dropping them like money was no object. As soon as the buoys went active, they began pinging at roughly 140 decibels. For context, that is louder than a gunshot, and it is happening inside a steel pressure hull. Imagine being locked in a shipping container while someone pounds on it non-stop with a sledgehammer. Inside the Kazan, the first ping hit, like the submarine itself, had turned into a massive bell, and someone had just taken a full swing at it. The effect was immediate and brutal. Sonar operators ripped their headsets off so fast they probably strained something. The whole idea of the silent service vanished in seconds. The submarines were now the loudest objects in the water column, like a Harley-Davidson idling in the middle of a meditation retreat. Every 30 seconds, another ping. No pause, no relief. Just ping after ping. While Russian crews were spinning in confusion, the P-8 crews were rotating shifts every 4 hours, eating real food using actual bathrooms, and operating from what was essentially a flying, climate-controlled command center. The contrast was not subtle. One side was working a professional watch rotation. The other was trapped in the underwater equivalent of a middle seat on a budget airline with no legroom and no escape. And that was only the beginning. Next up were the Arleigh Burke-class destroyers, finally stepping into their element. They activated their hull-mounted sonar systems, bow-mounted spherical arrays, packed with hundreds of transducers that work like underwater radar, listening for echoes bouncing off submerged targets. These systems can pump out so much acoustic energy that marine life near the ship can be physically stunned. At this point, the Russians were not just being tracked, they were being overwhelmed. This is what it looks like when the United States decides to use the ocean itself as a speaker system. Then came the simulated attack runs. P-8s dropped from altitude, screaming down from 25,000 feet toward the surface, as if weapons were about to be released. No ordnance required. The message alone was enough. Russian crews, already exhausted and disoriented, had to assume every single pass might be real. Emergency dives, ballast adjustments, hard rudder turns, over and over again. It was the psychological equivalent of someone faking you out repeatedly in a hand-slap game. You flinch every time, even when you know it might be a bluff. One of the submarines tried the underwater version of flooring it during a police chase, pushing into a 30-knot sprint in an attempt to break contact. The OK-650V reactor delivered roughly 43,000 horsepower, which sounds impressive until you remember that speed underwater comes with noise. A lot of noise. Instead of disappearing, the submarine sounded like someone had thrown a washing machine full of hammers down an elevator shaft. So why endure all of this? Because intelligence was the prize. Look at the radars mounted on the Ford's mast. Every radar has a fingerprint, specific frequencies, pulse patterns, and power levels. Collect those and you can design jammers to counter them. The Russians were recording the entire electromagnetic spectrum, cataloging every emission. During flight operations, the carrier launches aircraft roughly every 90 seconds, and each launch paints a clearer electronic picture. From Moscow's perspective, the punishment was worth the data. From the American side, this was just another reminder of who controls the Atlantic, and how quickly curiosity turns into regret when you push too close. That pattern alone was gold. From it, you can infer crew shift rotations, maintenance windows, and short vulnerability periods when attention dips. The Russians were mapping which escorts used which data link channels, how information flowed across the formation, and how the carrier group actually talked to itself under real operating conditions. What they were building was a digital blueprint of American carrier operations, the kind of data you need if you ever hope to design weapons or tactics that stand a chance against a carrier strike group. The problem was that NATO had no intention of letting them finish their homework. All three Russian submarines launched acoustic decoys devices meant to imitate submarine signatures and confuse pursuers. NATO's response was almost insulting in its efficiency. The computers classified each decoy in roughly a third of a second. The system essentially shrugged and said, "That's cute," then kept perfect track of all three real submarines. It was like trying to escape the police by tossing a mannequin out of your car, while they already have helicopters, satellites, and your license plate. And this was only the beginning. By the 24th hour, NATO had turned submarine hunting into something closer to performance art. A British ship arrived on scene with a Type 2087 towed array sonar, dragging roughly 2 kilometers of hydrophones behind her, an underwater listening net tuned for exactly this kind of fight. MH-60 Romeo helicopters began rotating overhead, hovering about 50 feet above the surface, and lowering dipping sonar directly into the water column. The Russian crews tried to hide in thermal clines, underwater temperature layers that can bend or weaken traditional sonar returns. Unfortunately for them, dipping sonar goes straight through those layers like they don't exist. It's the maritime equivalent of trying to hide behind a glass door. What made this even more impressive was the coordination required to keep it all from becoming chaos. One wrong move and aircraft could interfere with each other or worse. NATO solved this by carving the airspace into strict blocks. P-8 aircraft operated between $20,000 and 25,000 feet. Helicopters stayed below 500 feet with at least 5,000 feet of horizontal separation. Each nation was assigned specific radio frequencies. Americans on UHF British, on VHF Norwegians on both because someone had to translate. Every aircraft had an assigned patrol box, essentially an aerial parking space, and you needed clearance from the airborne controller to leave it. That controller was juggling aircraft from 3 nations each with different capabilities, fuel limits, and sensor ranges. All of that data flowed back to the Fusion Center at Northwood, where sensor feeds from every platform were merged in real time into a single 3-dimensional picture of the battle space. It looked like the world's most expensive video game, except this one came with nuclear reactors and very real consequences. And to be blunt, the sailors running it were having a great time. Helicopters would hover directly above the submarines, lower their sonar, and start pinging. Russian crews could probably feel the vibrations in their teeth. Meanwhile, the Arleigh Burke destroyers were not just relying on hull-mounted sonar. They streamed their AN/SQR-19 towed arrays, dragging their own sensitive underwater microphones to catch any sound the Russians made while maneuvering. At this point, the submarines were drowning in contacts. P-8s overhead, helicopters dipping sonar surface ships, encircling them. One rumor making the rounds was that a Russian submariner asked his captain whether they could just surface and apologize because the pings were hurting his stomach. This was no longer hunting. This was a demonstration. NATO had effectively turned the Norwegian Sea into a 48-hour electronic music festival, except Russia couldn't find the exit. And the base never stopped. And here's the part that really matters. Remember that Virginia-class submarine mentioned earlier. For the entire 48 hours, that American submarine maintained a perfect trail position using its TB-34 towed array sonar, running so quietly on electric propulsion that it might as well have been a ghost carrying torpedoes. That pattern told them everything: crew shift cycles, maintenance windows, even the exact moments when a carrier group would be most vulnerable. They were mapping which escorts used, which data link channels, how the formation talked to itself, how information flowed. What they were building wasn't curiosity. It was a digital blueprint of American carrier operations. The kind of intelligence you use to design weapons and tactics meant to kill a carrier group. But NATO wasn't about to let them finish their homework. All three Russian submarines launched acoustic decoys devices meant to imitate submarine signatures and confuse pursuers. Classic move. The NATO response was almost insulting in how fast it worked. Their computers classified every decoy in roughly a third of a second. It was basically the system saying, "Oh, that's cute." Tracking on all three real submarines never slipped for a moment. It was like trying to escape the police by throwing a mannequin out of your car while the cops already have helicopters, satellites, and your license plate. And from here on out, it only got worse. By hour 24, NATO had turned submarine hunting into something closer to performance art than warfare. A British warship arrived towing its Type 2087 array, nearly 2 kilometers of hydrophones dragging silently behind her. Underwater ears stretched out across the sea. MH-60 Romeo helicopters began rotating in shifts, hovering about 50 ft above the surface, lowering their dipping sonar straight into the water column, actively searching for the submarines below. The Russian crews tried hiding inside thermal Klein layers, underwater temperature boundaries that can bend sonar waves. That trick works unless someone drops dipping sonar straight through it, like the layer isn't even there, which NATO did, repeatedly. Trying to hide from dipping sonar behind a thermal layer is like hiding from your wife behind a glass door. You're technically behind something, but the situation isn't improving. And despite how effortless it looked, the coordination behind this was brutal. One mistake, an aircraft would collide or interfere with each other. NATO solved this by dividing the airspace into strict blocks. P-8 Poseidons operated between $20,000 and $25,000 every 2 helicopters stayed below 500 ft, with 5,000 ft of horizontal separation between aircraft. Every nation had assigned radio frequencies. Americans on UHF, British on VHF, Norwegians on both because someone had to translate. Every aircraft had a designated patrol box, essentially aerial parking spaces, and you needed clearance from the airborne controller to leave your box. That controller was juggling aircraft from 3 different nations each, with different capabilities and limits. Meanwhile, the Data Fusion Center at Northwood was combining every sensor feed in real time, generating a fully integrated 3D picture of the battle space. It looked like the most expensive video game ever built. Except this was real, and the Russian crews were not enjoying the gameplay. Helicopters would hover directly above the submarines, lower their sonar, and start pinging. The Russian sailors could probably feel it in their teeth. At the same time, Arleigh Burke-class destroyers weren't just using hull-mounted sonar. They deployed their AN/SQR-19 towed arrays, dragging their own underwater microphones to catch even the slightest noise. There's a rumor that one Russian submariner asked his captain whether they could just surface and apologize, because the sonar pings were upsetting his stomach. By this point, the Russians weren't just being tracked. They were experiencing what happens when America decides to turn the ocean into a speaker system. Submarine displays filled with more sonar contacts than a Kardashian gets Instagram notifications. P-8s overhead, helicopters mid-depth, surface ships all around them. This wasn't hunting anymore. This was a full-on smackdown. NATO had turned the Norwegian Sea into a 48-hour EDM festival where Russia couldn't find the exit, and the base never stopped. And here's the best part. Remember that Virginia-class submarine mentioned earlier? For the full 48 hours, that American boat maintained perfect trail position using its TB-34 towed array sonar, running so quietly on electric propulsion that it was essentially a ghost armed with torpedoes. The crew watched everything unfold like a Netflix documentary titled "Making a Submariner Why Russia Can't." Every sound was recorded, every evasive maneuver, every desperate attempt to break contact. The Russians tried everything. They hid in underwater canyons. NATO parked helicopters directly overhead and dipped sonar like fishing in a barrel. They changed depth aggressively. Destroyer sonar tracked them from surface to seafloor. They tried sprint and drift tactics. The American submarine matched every move perfectly, like a dance partner who knew the routine better than they did. At one point, the U.S. submarine captain decided to send a message. A single brief pulse of active sonar from the BQQ-10 bow array. Not enough to reveal exact position. Just enough to say, "We've been here the whole time." Imagine being stalked by John Cena for 2 days. You can't see him, but you know he's there. And every now and then he whispers, "You can't see me." That does things to your head. By day 2, the P-8 crews refined their system. They timed sonar pings specifically to interrupt REM sleep cycles, hitting just as Russian sailors started to drift off. Ping, over and over. Like having a roommate who sets alarms every 5 minutes and never actually wakes up. After 48 hours, the Russian crews were probably seeing colors that don't exist and talking to people who weren't there. And it still wasn't finished. Desperation kicked in. The 3 submarines made a final attempt to run. They threw every trick from the old Soviet playbook into the water. Unfortunately for them, NATO had written that playbook, annotated it, digitized it, and practiced against it for decades. They hugged the bottom terrain. P-8s switched to magnetic anomaly detection. They changed depth violently. Destroyers covered them from surface to seabed. They launched every remaining decoy. NATO systems cataloged them instantly like Pokemon cards. Gotta catch them all, and they were all worthless. After hours of failure, the Russians learned an important lesson. Trying to break contact with NATO in the Norwegian Sea is like trying to lose the IRS during tax season. They know where you are, where you're going, and exactly how much you owe. Eventually, the Russian command aborted the mission. In military language, that means retreat, while pretending it was the plan all along. They withdrew north, still submerged, probably already drafting reports about a successful reconnaissance operation that absolutely did not involve 48 hours of acoustic punishment. NATO maintained contact during the withdrawal like bouncers escorting someone out of a club. P-8s followed part of the way just to make sure they actually left and to rub it in. Everyone knew what really happened, but appearances were maintained. In those 48 hours, NATO collected enough acoustic intelligence to identify these submarines instantly in the future. Every pump, every valve, even how their toilets flush is now sitting comfortably inside NATO databases. Russian state media spun the whole thing as a success. Sure. And the Titanic successfully tested its ice detection systems. The real lesson was simple. The Norwegian Sea isn't contested waters. It's a NATO swimming pool. And you can build all the advanced submarines you want, but if you can't handle 2 days of democracy's greatest hits blasted through active sonar, maybe don't jump into the deep end next time. Bye for now.